Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Moses Draper. Moses Draper is the co-founder of imbuecacao.com. And you can find out more about Moses Draper and his wonderful work at his website, imbuecacao.com. Welcome, Moses Draper.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Moses Draper, what exactly is ceremonial cacao?
That's a great question to start. So most people are familiar with chocolate, and chocolate comes from the cacao tree, the cacao bean. So when we say cacao first, what we're talking about is pure cacao, which is essentially the people might be familiar with cacao nibs that you can buy in the store. It's that fully ground up. There's a lot of processing that goes into getting to that point, but cacao would be fully ground up, and then it usually gets hardened in a paste or bar format. So for us, ceremonial cacao, kind of like in the tea industry, you'd have ceremonial grade. For us, ceremonial cacao is of the highest quality, and that has to do with everything from varietal selection, how the trees are grown and tended, how they're fermented, dried, roasted, all the processing steps. Because unlike, say, a banana where you have your variety and your growing conditions, then you just harvest it and eat it, cacao has a lot of steps that take it to its finished form, that really radically alter the cacao. And so for us, ceremonial cacao is both the intention to consume it with respect and love and produce it that way, and also the practical steps and how they're done along the way.
So, someone listening to this might say, I like chocolate. I personally eat dark chocolate almost every day, as I like to joke, for medicinal purposes. 70% or above, right? And it's great for you. It's got magnesium, which is so good for calming the nervous system. And so many people are deficient in that. What is the difference between performing a cacao ceremony and eating chocolate?
Yeah, so it probably would help just to differentiate between chocolate and cacao in terms of the health benefits, because that message has been around for a while. Eat dark chocolate, it's good for your health. What they're not telling you is that it's actually the cacao itself that's good for your health. So most chocolate bars, they're both further processing the cacao, so they end up stripping it of a lot of the nutrients, and then they're recombining it in different proportions with other things. A lot of times additives, you got cane sugar, soy lecithin, and lots of other things to make it into a chocolate bar that strips the nutrients. So for us, when we work with pure cacao, you're getting all the benefits straight up. You don't need to worry about all the other things they're adding in or the extra processing that they're doing that will remove nutrients. So for example, cocoa powder that most of us probably grew up with making our hot cocoa with, they take pure cacao and they defat it. So the cacao butter is about 50% of cacao by weight and has a lot of the antioxidants. It has a lot of the mood enhancing compounds. It's a really healthy fat for the body. So they take that out. And in the process, what remains, the cocoa powder, is further denatured to make it into the usable form. So you're actually not getting nearly as many of the health benefits as you would think, even at a 70% plus bar. So back to your question of chocolate versus cacao ceremony. So if we start with a pure product where we're getting all of the benefits, a cacao ceremony really is cultivating a relationship with cacao as what I like to call a plant medicine. So something that we have reverence for, have respect for, that we're open to learning from. And then in a cacao ceremony, it's a really, in the modern world, cacao ceremony is a pretty open-ended term that usually involves drinking the cacao, because it'll come into the bloodstream more quickly, and then pairing that with a whole wide variety of other spiritual practices. And with cacao in the mix, it really opens the heart enhances focus and really allows us to access these inner places in a much more profound way. That really, almost any practice, you could add cacao to the mix and then go deeper with that practice. So it's, in a way, it's, chocolate can be a bit of a mindless habit in a way. And cacao ceremony is bringing that intention back into what we put into our body, how it affects us, and actually even going further to go deeper with the cacao and how it can help us in our healing work.
Now for over 6 years now, I have done medical intuitive readings for a healing center in Costa Rica. And before anyone gets there, they fill out a form and send me their photo, and I do a medical intuitive reading to help them prepare for their plant medicine ceremony. So I have great respect for plant medicines. And here at the Natural Healing Show, we've interviewed a number of experts on plant medicines, and now you about cacao. So Moses Draper, founder of imbuecacao.com, how does cacao compare with ayahuasca or other plant medicines?
Yeah, so as you're probably aware, the U.S. has seen a huge resurgence in the last couple of years and interest in psychedelics in all forms. And cacao ceremony, I think, has really exploded in the last 5 to 10 years in the Western world. And I think those two are happening in tandem because there's an interest that people have in what do plants or psychedelics have to offer us for healing purposes. And where cacao fits into that mix, for me, I like to often describe it as cacao is more like a doorway that offers us this opportunity to go deeper, but it doesn't kick us through. So it's a much gentler, softer medicine. It doesn't take us nearly as far out, which means that it's also easier to integrate a lot of the learnings. So it's a medicine that we can use in a daily way. And for me, the fact that it's legal, as in, I don't have to go really far away to do it. I can do it for myself in my own home. It's safe. We're talking about essentially pure chocolate in a slightly higher dose for a ceremony. So there's not really a lot to be concerned about in terms of, is this going to send me to the hospital? Could something seriously medically wrong happen? And then also, I think a lot of people are finding that they're looking for something that's more regular. So, with some of the heavier hitting plant medicines, you might want to do it a couple times a year, maybe once a month. It's not like people are doing that every day. And then you take time to integrate that, which can take months, it can take years. Whereas with cacao, it's kind of like a daily or regular ally that can keep us at a more of a baseline that's in our hearts, in flow with life, and where we're just kind of shifting slightly into a space that feels more at ease. There's times someone will say to me like, "Oh, I drank the cacao and it doesn't feel like anything is happening." And I say, "Well, how did you feel?" And they're like, "Oh, I was really relaxed and kind of peaceful, but nothing happened." And I'll say, "Well, what do you normally feel like?" And like, "Well, I usually feel kind of anxious or nervous and I'm moving kind of fast." And I kind of point them gently back towards, well, that's partly how cacao works, in that gentle way that is not going to force you into something, but really help us just shift into a more natural state of flow and health that's gentler than some of the heavier hitting plants.
So I know, for example, with iboga, that there are certain health conditions that people should not be taking iboga for. For example, people with major heart conditions should not be doing iboga. And with iboga and ayahuasca, in both cases, you want to work with a shaman. You don't want to do it by yourself. And for example, with iboga, there's a 1-to-1 ratio. In other words, they'll have one person all night watching you and making sure that you're okay. And with ayahuasca, there's usually a shaman and a group of people. Is it safe to do cacao on your own in your home?
Completely. Yes. That's one of the beauties of it. A lot of people are changing their morning coffee routine for a cacao routine, using that maybe with a morning meditation, a morning journal practice, doing ceremony, not necessarily every day, but in a regular way. And that's one of the great things about cacao, is that it's safe for people to use at home. Again, we're talking about pure chocolate in a slightly higher dose. Like any food, any medicine, obviously there's some things to be aware of. You don't want to consume too much. It is a strong bitter, it is stimulating. So, for example, I never tell people to drink a large dose in the evening if they want to go to bed shortly after, much like you wouldn't do that with coffee. um, there's a couple things to be aware of because it's a stimulant. Some people who are more sensitive to stimulants can feel a little bit jittery. And there are some prescription antidepressants, usually the older generation, the MAOI based ones, that are contraindicated with cacao. Most people on those would know that they're not eating chocolate anyway, so it should be pretty straightforward. So really it's just a matter of gauging your own dose and setting the space. That being said, there are plenty of people who lead cacao ceremonies who have years of experience working with it and holding space for groups. And that's also a really beautiful way to use it. So I'd encourage people to experiment with both, because there's something to learn about being in our own space and just finding that energy in a quieter way, and then also being in a group space and seeing where that leads.
So Moses Draper, founder of imbuecacao.com, how did you personally get started with cacao ceremony?
Well, it was a love of chocolate, like you said. And I was at this festival in Costa Rica probably 12, 13 years ago. And at the beginning of a festival, it was this all night fire circle festival. And in the opening night, someone said, we're going to do a cacao ceremony. And in my mind, I just thought, oh, chocolate, that sounds great. And so we sat around the fire and we drank this cup of really rich, thick cacao. And about 20 or 30 minutes later, as the cacao started to take effect, it felt like I was falling in love with everyone there in this effortless and overflowing way, where I realized there was a lot more going on than just the chocolate that I knew. And it also came at a synchronistic time for me, because I had a tendency back in my 20s to think of inner work as this race of getting somewhere. So it was like, how do I do more? How do I go faster? Really kind of pushing. And the cacao has this really gentle way of saying, hey, we're right here. There's nowhere to get to, and everything is good right now. And so that kind of gentle but very heart-centered energy really resonated a lot with me in the ways that I had found that were powerful to move through my own inner work. So that kicked off a couple of years of exploration of just working with cacao, learning more about it, seeing how it worked in different settings, before my wife and I started to offer cacao ceremonies.
Now, one of the things that we know here at the Natural Healing Show is that all drugs have side effects. And for example, when I have clients who are taking pharmaceutical drugs, I encourage them to go to rxlist.com and look up the side effects. And then there's another website called epocrates.com, where if you're on more than one drug, because most people who take pharmaceutical drugs are on many drugs, unfortunately, and yet many times even the medical doctors are not looking at how all these drugs are interacting. And for example, with iboga, you really want to be off all medications, legal and illegal, before doing iboga. What drugs should be avoided while doing a cacao ceremony?
There's not really any in the same way as some of the other heavier plant medicines. There's some people that have raised concerns about SSRI antidepressants, because if you look up SSRIs, they have known contraindications with, say, an MAOI based antidepressant, and there's something called serotonin syndrome, where you can have too much uptake of serotonin. Because cacao has serotonin and precursors to it, some people think that the two might not work well together. In speaking with pharmacists and in personal experience over a decade, I've never seen that actually come up in a serious way. So with cacao, like, the realm that we're talking about is never like serious medical, like you might end up in the hospital kind of situations. Most that I've seen is there's a mild detox because the bitter might stimulate the liver. People might feel a little bit nauseous or headachy. Usually that's just drink water and it'll pass. And the only other consideration is people with serious heart complications, because it's such a vasodilator. It's good to be aware of if that's a good thing to do or not. But again, most of the research on cacao, as you were mentioning earlier, is very heart healthy. It can improve heart health. So by serious, it's more like history of heart attack, pacemaker, and whether or not having the extra vasodilation will work or not. And that's something that usually people in those situations know of. So there's less prescription things that would be contraindicated and more just general awareness of taking it slow on the dose. Usually I suggest people start at home with 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce of cacao. When we do ceremony, I do a maximum of 2 ounces, but I offer that as a 2/3 first, and then people can wait a little bit and see how that sits with them, because tolerances vary, as with any plant medicine.
All right. And with that, let's take a break and listen to a commercial sponsor here at UK Health Radio. We'll be right back with more information from Moses Draper, co-founder of ImbueCacao.com. So Moses Draper, take us through the experience. So if I came to you for a cacao ceremony, what would I actually experience? What does that look like? What does it feel like?
Yeah, so one of the things that I love about what's happened in the last 10 plus years around cacao ceremony is that there really isn't a standard answer to that question. So sometimes when people think of cacao ceremony, they might imagine there's, say, a specific lineage or tradition, and there's a format, and it's always done that way. But really, what's happening in the West these days is that people are bringing in the element of cacao, which is the drinking of it with respect and reverence, and then pairing that with a huge range of modalities. So a lot of it's going to depend on the facilitator of what they're offering. People, in a kind of more general way, people do ecstatic dance, they do sound healing, one-on-one therapy work, group processes, meditation, yoga. I mean, I could go on the ways that people will pair cacao. So for me, that's part of the beauty of it, is that the people who are facilitating cacao has this way of inviting our own gifts and the things that we want to share with people, to go deeper with those, and cacao is this vehicle to support that. So for me, with cacao ceremonies, might look really different than what someone else will do, but the common elements that you're going to find are the piece about drinking cacao, obviously. um, and that's going to look like, for me, there's always this element or this theme, as I've said, about reverence for it. So I like to serve people one-on-one, connect with them, then we all will drink the cacao together and have that moment of acknowledging that we are actually taking something into our bodies and opening ourselves up to whatever cacao wants to share with us in that moment. And then, mainly based on my own personal preference, I really tend more towards small group processes, experiential ways of going deeper into our own inner landscape. I have a background in body-based therapy, and that work really informs for me a lot of what we get up to, even if it includes something like a session of dance or movement or shamanic journey work. There's a piece of integrating that into ourselves in a way of being more aware of what's happening within. So there isn't a standard answer, and it's going to depend a lot. I've done cacao parties where instead of alcohol, we just drink cacao, and there's music and social hangout time, and that's really sweet. I've done gatherings of 100 people, where we have just a short window to do a guided meditation together, and then they head off and do their thing. So, these days for me, it looks more like in-depth or longer training programs, just passing on, everything I know about cacao and how to offer it to others, and really how to cultivate that relationship with the plant themselves.
So Moses Draper, you mentioned that you had a background in body therapy. So tell us what that background is: massage, yoga. What's your background?
More somatic-based therapeutic, like talk counseling, but with an awareness of trauma, childhood trauma, ways that the body has to resolve that trauma. A lot of that was my own deep personal work, training with a mentor of mine, and that work has really informed a lot of my other forays into meditation, dance, shamanic practices, plant medicines, etc., as a kind of framework to integrate a lot of that. So it's just a lot of it in a way is just the acknowledgement that our body has a huge amount of wisdom and what it stores in there and how it naturally will move that given the right conditions. So really for me, a lot of what a ceremony is creating that space, that container where people feel the safety to fully show up themselves. And so in whatever is really needing to be released in that moment can come out and be healed and moved through.
And since we're on the subject of plant medicines, can cacao be safely used along with other plant medicines?
Many of them, yes. There are, there's some peyote traditions, for example, that actually will coat the button with chocolate. There's some traditions that use psilocybin with cacao, both as an accelerant and as a make it more enjoyable to consume. It's not an area I have as much expertise to actually give specific information on, but as a general rule, I find cacao a very synergistic plant. It works well with a lot of people in the herbal world will bring in other herbs to pair with their cacao, and then same in the psychedelic world. Obviously, there's some like ayahuasca that are on ayahuasca dietas, they often have you eliminate cacao because it is an MAOI, so that it doesn't go well like right before. But I know facilitators who will use cacao as integration post ceremony. So it's a really generally pretty versatile, and there's some cases where it doesn't go as well.
Now, in my 29 years experience full-time in natural healing, I've studied and practiced many forms of natural healing. And one of the things that I've studied is something called alchemy, which is a system of herbology from the Middle Ages. And in alchemy, chocolate, cacao heals Venus. And Venus is the most spiritual aspect of ourselves. What are the spiritual benefits of cacao?
Yeah, so I like to, most people when they think about cacao, think about the heart, and this is true even in the chocolate relationship. If you think about the Western world, it's take cacao somewhere out of the picture, and we have chocolate, and it's already associated with Valentine's Day. It's associated with love. It's I'm feeling depressed, I'm going to go eat some chocolate, and there's actually a really natural element to that because of the magnesium, as you mentioned, anandamide, PEA, serotonin. All these mood enhancing chemicals that actually really do release us. There was actually a study years ago to the UK, and they asked people, would you prefer to eat some chocolate or kiss someone? And more people said chocolate than kiss someone. So there's this relationship in a way that we already have with it, and cacao ceremony is just a more intentional version of that. So in terms of spiritual benefits, for me, there's definitely that heart piece where often people feel more heart open. And, that doesn't always mean like my first ceremony, which was a much more overflowing, very obvious version. Sometimes it's much more subtle or gentle, but it brings this heart-centered way of being in general. So if we were doing, say, deeper emotional healing work, it's a lot easier to access those difficult places with that extra sense of feeling held by the cacao, by our own heart. And a couple of pieces for me with cacao, or one is that it enhances focus. So it's really easy to find a deeper practice with cacao in the mix, like meditation, for example. I've guided meditation where cacao is in the mix, and people who've never experienced meditation before will say, oh, well, I never realized that meditation was so easy. All these people tell me meditation can be really challenging. And with cacao in the mix, just finding that easeful state where the mind isn't very active is a lot easier. Same is true with something like guided imagery work or shamanic journey work, where oftentimes in that kind of work, people have a lot of mental chatter happening and they're like, what am I doing? Where am I supposed to go, left or right? What's kind of happening in this journey? They're questioning it more. And with cacao, it's easier to get absorbed in the journey without as much of the mental chatter distracting us. So for me, that those are the two main ways that I think it really supports our healing work, is a kind of heart-centered presence that holds us in wherever we want to go. And for some people, that's just the daily ritual where they're not really going deep with it, and at other times in a cacao ceremony, it's really allowing us to open up in a much more profound way.
Now, in my work as a medical intuitive healer, one of the things that I look at is whether a person's heart is energetically open or closed. Now, if your heart is closed, then you're either doing one or two things, or both. You're punishing yourself. So you're punishing yourself by closing off your heart, or you're protecting yourself, because many of us have had experiences that broke our heart and we just closed down energetically so that our heart doesn't get hurt again. Or you can be punishing yourself and protecting yourself, both. What is your experience? Does cacao energetically open our heart, and how does it do that?
Yeah, well, definitely yes. On a physical level, a lot of the research on the health benefits is about the heart healthy. So it's a vasodilator. It's going to open, increase blood flow, and on the energetic or spiritual side, for me, it's a way to transcend that pattern that you described. So if we're doing one or both of those, that keeps us locked in that pattern. And often what we need is the feeling of enough safety or love to start to let that armor down. And that's a lot of what cacao provides, the sense of our own capacity to hold that pain, and the sense that there is another consciousness, we might call it plant spirit, that is there with us saying, hey, this is okay to feel this pain. You don't need to keep punishing yourself. You don't need to keep protecting yourself. So it's a beautiful acknowledgement. It's not a denial of the pain there or just kind of bypassing it. It's a really loving way to be fully present with it so that we can actually open and unfold in an organic way that's not kind of just trying to blow through those defenses, but really honors and validates them, and then allows us to feel the pain that's underneath it so that we can open again.
Now, if you spoke to a traditional medical doctor who's an expert at the heart, like a cardiologist or a cardiac surgeon, traditional MDs talk about there's basically two kinds of heart problems. There are electrical problems in the heart where signals are not getting through properly. And then there's plumbing problems where there's maybe a blockage somewhere. Is cacao safe for all heart conditions?
That's something that I would definitely suggest if people have serious heart conditions, consulting a doctor with, just because I wouldn't want to recommend something. There's various types of heart complications. Some of them can be more serious, and I think it's always great to consult with a doctor. I would say likely there would be a restricted diet of things that vasodilate or stimulate the heart if cacao is going to be an issue. So that's always a good litmus test. Like, for example, with the MAOI based antidepressants, the first generation that aren't that common anymore, people were on a restricted diet that included low to no chocolates. That's pretty obvious that a higher dose of pure cacao is not a good idea. And again, as I said before, all of the research around cacao in the heart is positive heart healthy effects, that it lowers bad cholesterol, lowers high blood pressure, and the risk of heart conditions in general. So my sense is that even for those people, there's probably a certain dose, which might be smaller, that's going to be helpful. But again, I think consulting with a doctor about, say, if you want to do an ounce as a daily drink, whether that stimulation or the vasodilation is going to be an issue.
And with that, let's take a break for another message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. And we'll be right back with Moses Draper, co-founder of imbuecacao.com. So Moses Draper, co-founder of imbuecacao.com, what are the health benefits of cacao?
Yeah, really high in antioxidants, one of the highest food sources of antioxidants. Again, pure cacao, not chocolate, is going to give you the most of those, in part because the cacao butter, which gets removed in a lot of processing, has a lot of the antioxidants. So it's got a really high ORAC value. As you mentioned earlier, it's high in magnesium, one of the higher plant sources of magnesium. It's a muscle relaxant. It's deficient, as you were saying, in a lot of modern diets. Um, a number of different mood enhancing compounds, anandamide, PEA, serotonin or precursors. All of those are going to just be uplifting to the mood. And then, as I was mentioning before, a lot of the heart health benefits that come with regular consumption of cacao. I believe it was back in the 90s when a lot of the research kicked off on dark chocolate. There was this group off the coast of Panama known as the Cuna, and they lived in the San Blas Islands. And their traditional diet consisted of about an ounce of cacao a day in drink form, but a much more like almost like a weak tea. So it wasn't like in a ceremony where you drink it in a condensed form. They were just kind of drinking it throughout the day. And even those of the Kuna who went to, say, Panama City had a more Western diet. When they came back and got back on the traditional diet, they had almost no incidence of serious heart complications, no high blood pressure, and no high bad cholesterol levels. And when they connected it eventually to the cacao consumption, that regular consumption actually was the key contributor to that situation. And so that, a lot of people got into dark chocolate from there, and the chocolate companies got involved in all sorts of research, which has really proliferated in the last 20, 30 years. But those are the main benefits.
Is cacao a natural antidepressant and or an anti-anxiety remedy?
That's a tricky one. I mean, part of me wants to say yes, in the sense that, when I consume cacao, when people are in ceremony using it for their own rituals, I think it definitely has the effect of calming the nervous system, of lifting the mood. And at the same time, I'm careful in the sense of, people who might have more serious depression issues or anxiety issues. I wouldn't want them to think that just adding a little bit of cacao in is going to resolve all of it. I think that's, takes a lot of deeper inner work from a natural healing perspective to, not just get on the meds to cover it up, but actually to resolve some of the deeper stuff there. So I think cacao can support that, but I would not say it's a cure all for more serious conditions like that.
So we've been talking about cacao ceremonies, and yet there's must be many ways of consuming cacao. How should a person consume cacao or make the drink? Is this something you can do daily?
Yeah, definitely. So in ceremony and for a daily ritual or just as a coffee replacement, most of our customers at Imbue and what we do at home is using cacao in drink form, which is originally how it was consumed in the Americas. So essentially what people are doing is they get pure cacao. So it's important to source that in a quality way, make sure it is pure cacao that you're working with. And then really you're just heating up water and adding the cacao to it. I suggest for a daily dose, starting around half ounce to an ounce of cacao, add that to, a mug full, a cup of water. And really all you need to do is just heat the water up to just before boil, add the cacao, whisk it up. At that point, you have a cacao drink. It's going to be more bitter than most of the Western palate is used to. So people can add any sweetener to taste. Spices. Cayenne works really nicely with cacao because it helps absorb into the bloodstream quicker. And then from there, for taste, you can do cinnamon, vanilla, coconut milk, etc., to make it really delicious. There's lots of add-ons that people get into, adaptogenic mushroom mixes, that kind of thing. But really, the base drink that people are making is the hot water and cacao. And if you whisk it up nice, it gets really frothy, and then everything else from there is really just making it a more delicious concoction. And for me, cacao is not one of those plant medicines that it has to be bitter, and it's a bitter medicine in that sense of it will always be unpleasant. Cacao can actually be really decadent and delicious and enjoyable. So I encourage people to make it that way.
So if someone is wanting to start out with the cacao, what dose should they start out with? And then what dose is typically used in cacao ceremonies?
Yeah, so my average ranges are half ounce to an ounce for a daily dose. So that would be, say, in the morning instead of coffee, you could drink that, or in the afternoon instead of a coffee. An ounce is a nice daily dose measure. And then in ceremony, the upper limit that I'll serve people is 2 ounces of cacao. That's per person. So that's 2 ounces of cacao plus the water. And and for people who are new to it, with the 2 ounces, I'll always serve about 2/3 of that first, let them wait about 45 minutes and make sure that their body is feeling good with that before they decide if they want the rest of it or not. Um, and tolerances really vary. I mean, there's people I've done trainings with who a 1/4 ounce to a half ounce is really like that's their ceremonial dose. They feel it really strongly. More than that brings on more nausea. So I think experimentation is really important with those rough averages in mind, knowing that, some people have a higher tolerance, some people lower, and it's really just what feels good in the body.
Now, you talked about how there's a huge variety in how people all over the world hold cacao ceremonies. When you do a cacao ceremony, what does your cacao ceremony look like?
These days, mostly I do cacao trainings. I don't do as many one-off ceremonies. I've got 4 kids these days, and so we used to do a little circuit around New England in the northeast of the United States doing ceremonies, and those would be with kirtan and meditation and festivals and stuff. But these days, it's more like 1 day, 3 day cacao trainings, and so that's a deeper dive into cacao experientially for ourselves. And so we explore a whole variety of modalities. I like to let people experience it with, more therapeutic interprocessing work, with dance or movement, something more movement based, with sound, with journey work. It pairs really well with time outside in nature. So those are all elements I like to bring into a training format so that people can get a sense of the versatility of it, and then also how to incorporate it into the things that they already offer in terms of bringing their gifts forth more. So those are kind of the elements that I'll weave together into more of a training format these days.
Now, one of the things that those of us who bring awareness to what we consume, we're thinking about the quality of what we're eating. So, such as, is it organic for starters? And then also about the places where our food is produced. What should a person look for in sourcing cacao?
Yeah, those are some of the main pieces with cacao. So in general, what we suggest. So first of all, it's important to make sure that what you're getting is actually pure cacao. The chocolate industry would call that cocoa paste or cocoa liqueur. There's a lot of ceremonial cacao providers out there these days, and for us, our goal is, in the kind of production end, is what you said is what are the natural growing practices. So certified organic cacao for us, that's a must, to know that there's no pesticides put on them. We have a pretty transparent relationship with a small collective of farms that produce the cacao, so we know how much they're getting paid, we know how well they're fermenting the cacao beans. um, so, in the modern era, there's a lot of opportunity to have, even though this is, cacao is grown in tropical regions far away from home. It's not like a local farmer's market. There's still opportunities to know that you're sourcing the cacao from somewhere that holds that relationship in a good way, so that people are making a living wage from it, that the cacao is treated well at each step of the way, so that the end product is as quality as they can get. So really looking for, is there some kind of transparency? Do companies talk about how they deal with those various steps? Sometimes people just rely on more marketing claims, like they'll say I have Nacional Arriba variety cacao or something like that, which is not an actual variety. It's just a nice sounding word for cacao. Um, so instead of actual, all the steps along the way, being able to know what's happening, those are the things that I would look for.
Now, I've seen products that include cacao and aphrodisiac form formulas. Is cacao an aphrodisiac?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's kind of like what we were talking about before with the heart opening effect and the vasodilation. If more blood is flowing, we're more sensitive to the touch. The heart is open. There's often an as I was describing in my very first experience with it, that overflowing sense of love, and that can definitely go in the more sensual direction, in obviously in the right circumstances.
How do you suggest people get started to working with cacao, and what should they look for when they're buying cacao?
Yeah, so I think that the starting point is finding a high quality source for cacao, with all the things I was mentioning before of, is it organic? Do they pay their farmers well? Is there respect for the plant and how they process it? So all those steps in looking for the actual source. And then once you have the cacao at home, it often comes in bar form or little discs, or we also have a pre-shaved powdered version. So whatever form you get the pure cacao in, the starting point is to set aside a little bit of time and try out the daily dose. Make a really delicious drink, set aside some time, maybe as a morning meditation or journal practice, manifestation practice, whatever other tools you have at hand, or just to sit and enjoy the warm sunshine. I think it's great to start out with a way of giving a little more space to seeing what the effects are for yourself, and then kind of working up the dose and other situations that you might attend a ceremony, or if you have a practice like you go to a meditation group, you could do cacao before going to the meditation group and just starting to get a sense of the different ways that it works and supports our healing work.
Now, many of the plant medicine practitioners that I work with, that I interview, who work with a specific plant medicine over time, develop a deep kinship with that particular plant medicine and really understand the messages that that plant medicine is trying to deliver at this time. In your professional opinion, what messages does cacao have for our culture and our society at this time?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I often like to think about it in those terms of, why has there been a resurgence of interest in cacao? For a long time, it's just been, chocolate or that kind of more industrial relationship. So for me, the words that came to mind just as you were saying that are unconditional love. And I think cacao has this way of wanting to spread the love, and it's really indiscriminate about it. It'll be in a Hershey's chocolate bar, it'll be in a cacao ceremony. I don't think the cacao itself cares as much, other than it wants to get out there and open hearts, and it wants to do it in this gentle, supportive way that reminds us that it's okay to be fully present with all of our experience right now, whether that's in joy or in our grief, whatever it is. The cacao wants to share that with us in this really gentle way that I think helps us open in new ways, that if we, some of the other plant medicines can be really, they can kind of push us into opening. And cacao helps us open, but in that really gentle way.
Now, you mentioned that your first cacao ceremony was in Costa Rica. What motivated you to start sharing cacao with others?
I think it was that same feeling, that feeling that the cacao itself wanted to be shared, and that there was a part of me in what I feel like my purpose is here in life, of bringing more of that sense of love and unity and connection, to my life, to the people around me, to sit in that place more frequently. And so cacao is this vehicle to support us in doing that. So after my first ceremony, in working with it more, that message came through really strongly of just sharing the cacao, sharing that love with others. And it's a really common theme, all the people that I train in cacao ceremony work. There's always some variation of a similar story. Some people will come to a training never having done a cacao ceremony, but they just know there's something in this for me, and I know and I want to share it with others. And so I think that there's something to cacao that asks that of us.
You know, what's really interesting, I'm the author of 10 books. And when I wrote my second book, when I went to start writing my second book, which is called What is Healing, I only had one thought, which is that when you love unconditionally, you know whatever it is that you need to know. When you love unconditionally, you know whatever you need to know. And as a medical intuitive healer, people frequently come to me to open their intuition, but they want to go about it in a super intellectual way. In your opinion, how does cacao open our intuition?
Because it quiets the mind and brings us into the body and the heart more. And as I was saying, with, for example, with shamanic journey work or guided imagery work, there's a way in which the quieter mind can access a lot more what we might call altered states or intuitive states when the mind isn't so loud that it makes that quieter intuitive voice hard to hear. Because in my experience, intuition is never absent or gone. It's just that it's hard to hear because it's not an in-your-face loud voice. It's a very quiet, maybe it's just a feeling, or maybe it's an image. However it comes in that kind of mythopoetic way, cacao helps quiet the mind and open us to other ways of feeling and being that are very that go well with connecting with our intuition.
Yeah. And from my own experience as a professional medical intuitive healer, judgment shuts down that intuition. The minute you judge someone, you're going into your ego. That's bad. Or this is good, this is bad. You're categorizing in a very egoic way. But when you learn to love unconditionally everyone and everything, then you do open up your intuitive gifts in a very profound way. I think that's my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, Moses Draper, co-founder of imbuecacao.com, any final thoughts for our audience?
Go drink some cacao. Try it out for yourselves. I mean, that's, really for me, that's the cacao itself is the vehicle for that, is the thing to develop the relationship with. So if anything, I hope today has inspired some folks to go out and try cacao for themselves and see what's possible and how we can take our healing to the new level, and create more of that collective sense of greater love and connection between us.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at CatherineCarrigan.com and UnlimitedEnergyNow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been Moses Draper, co-founder of imbuecacao.com. And remember, when you open your heart, you heal yourself naturally. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.